Happy New Decade. Peace. Hotep. What up, former greeting you? So use. Today we're going to read chapter on I Don't Even Know This Race. Give me a second. Also, I'm going to try to, I don't even think I can share this, but that's good. Because, okay. I'm just sharing this. If you don't mind, share it too. It doesn't cost anything. Oh, you know what? Let me shout out JJ Chambly on Buffalo 716 Eats. Man, came through with the barbecue. Chef coming through too, who's about to start putting meals together. So we got some last night. It was good. We're going to keep y'all updated with that. If y'all ain't doing nothing on January 11th, y'all need to come to the Buffalo Convention. Where are we going to be? I think we're going to be at the Crucial Center, January 11th at 10 a.m. I'm going to go ahead and get into this reading because it's a lot to read and I don't know where I'm going to stop. All right. Hold on. I got to post on social media real quick. Yes, it is taking me longer than expected. I apologize in advance. Okay. I don't even know this race. Racism, one of the most baneful and persistent evils, is a major barrier to peace. Its practice perpetrates too outrageous a violation of the dignity of human beings to be countenanced under any pretext. Racism retards the unfoldment of the boundless potentialities of its victims, corrupts its perpetrators, and blights human progress. Recognition of the oneness of mankind, implemented by appropriate legal measures, must be universally upheld if this problem is to be overcome. The Promise of World Peace, the Baha'i Universal House of Justice, 1985. I arrived in South Africa in 1994 on the heels of President Nelson Mandela's inauguration. As an African American sharing the same black skin as those impacted by apartheid, I set off prepared to face opposition and shunning disgruntled white South Africans. My preparation resembled how one might respond after a run-in, perhaps a little flare-up of a few harsh words with a coworker on a Friday afternoon. You know that you're going to see that person the following week, so you mentally plan for Monday with a little internal script. Well, if they come in and they say that, this is what I'm going to say. You get the idea. So I had kind of a chip on my shoulder when I left Portland. Upon my arrival in South Africa, I was warmly greeted and enjoyed several uneventful weeks. In other words, I didn't have a single negative encounter. That's amazing. That's beautiful. That is peace. You didn't have a single negative encounter in 2 weeks. That is beautiful. In other words, I didn't have a single negative encounter. So I started to provoke people. I wasn't about to return home from South Africa without having a hard, real, deep kind of experience to recount. I would approach white South Africans and I'd say, tell me a little bit about that apartheid, huh? What was that like? On numerous occasions, they'd answer, yes, joy. It was an awful experience. The oppression of the blacks, the behavior of the whites. Glad it's over, though. Welcome to the new South Africa. Somewhat puzzled by these responses, I decided to ask some black South Africans. I'd go up to the black South Africans and say, so tell me a little bit about that apartheid. Pardon me. It must have been awful. They'd say, yeah, Joy, it was awful. The oppression of the blacks, the behavior of the whites. Glad it's over, though. Welcome to the new South Africa. I was shocked and thought to myself, is there anybody upset here in South Africa? Even we back in America have our disgruntled folks, like the neo-Nazis in Idaho. It later occurred to me that in 6 weeks I had spent traveling throughout South Africa, I had never felt the level of racial tension that I experienced at home in the United States. I had experienced more tension during my brief time in Portland Airport preparing to leave than I did throughout the entire time I spent in South Africa. I had to ask myself, what was I observing in this experience? Why was there so little racial tension in South Africa, a country with fresh, open wounds from apartheid? And why was there so much racial tension in America, a country that supposedly put an end to its great sin of chattel slavery well over 100 years ago, and its version of apartheid years prior to my visit to South Africa? Perhaps South Africans experience so little tension compared to Americans because officially apartheid has such a short lifespan, about 45 years. Perhaps it is because in the end, they voluntarily gave up their unjust system. Perhaps it is because South Africa admitted their crimes to the world and through the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, established in 1996, 2 years after apartheid was abolished. Many whites in South Africa owned up to the crimes they committed against their black countrymen. Maybe it's because South Africa has fought, suffered, and continues to struggle to establish justice and a firm footing while in the plain sight of us all. Whatever the reasons, it is clear that America has chosen a very different approach. I believe that racism is our nation's most serious illness, and the ever-present racial tension in America is just one of its manifestations. Racism has run like a poison through the blood of American society since Europeans first landed on these shores. And since that beginning, America and Americans have invested much in denying it. America and Americans' denial of their blatant racism and the attending atrocities committed throughout the nation's history has become pathological. Such denial has allowed this illness to fester for almost 400 plus years. It is what keeps this country sick with the issue of race. At the root of this sickness is the unchallenged belief that there are physical differences between people that account for the intellectual attributes and abilities of those people. Since before Aristotle's time, people have used the idea of racial difference to justify the subjugation and enslavement of those different and less powerful than themselves. Such brutality and oppression in the name of racial superiority has occurred so many times over so many years that we as a nation can no longer recognize and acknowledge the simple beauty and the diversity of the human family. Today, the concept of race has gotten confused with the variation in physical appearance and cultural expression. This confusion has led to our inability to identify simple, natural beauty in its diverse forms, as evidenced by people proudly saying, I don't notice race. This is particularly unfortunate because we now know that race, in the way most people have come to understand it, is as valid as a notion as the earth being flat. The myth of race. Here's a little test. What are the races of humanity? Perhaps you came up with a list that looks like this, using identification by colors, black, white, brown, yellow, red, or maybe you are more politically correct and you may have a list that looks like this, African, European, Asian, Native American, Hispanic, Latino, Pacific Islander, or perhaps you're really reaching black and came up with Negroid, Caucasoid, and Mongoloid. Despite our constant everyday use of the term race and our reference to various races, the biology of human beings is such that there are no real differences between us. Race is frequently characterized by skin color, hair texture, facial features, and so on. These differences are offered as examples of how we differ as humans. The underlying assumption is that there is a genetic biological component to these distinctions that define race. This assumption simply is not true. One cannot separate people into racial groups based upon any set of physical characteristics. Attempting to do so is fraught with contradictions. The Bushmen of South Africa look as much Asian as they do African. Pacific Islanders have both African and Asian features. The Ainu, I believe, A-I-N-U, of Japan look more European than Asian. The Sami of Scandinavia look as much like the Inuit and Yupik as they do like Europeans. That's I-N-U-I-T and Y-U-P-I-K. The Aborigines of Australia, who often look African, commonly have very straight or wavy hair and frequently blonde as children. These are just a few of the problems one runs into when arguing for the existence of biological racial differences. There are many other examples, among them dark skinned people from India or Egyptians who run the gamut from European looking to America to African. And how do I identify those from the Middle East? There is, however, hope for those who must differentiate people by race. Earwax. Yes, earwax. It seems that East Asian peoples have dry earwax and the rest of us have moist earwax. So if it is important to you to group people by physical characteristics, there's something you can hang your hat on. James King, the author of The Biology of Race, sums it up best. Race is a concept of society that insists there is genetic significance behind human variations in skin color that transcends outward appearance. However, race has no scientific merit outside of sociological classifications. There are no significant genetic variations within the human species to justify the division of races. Unfortunately, while the notion of race is illusory, the implication of racism in America is not. Whenever I ask an audience if they know what the term racism means, almost universally they say they do. I often give a little test to determine if everyone's on the same page regarding the term. I first ask my audience if whites in America can be racist. Of course, everybody agrees they can. I then ask if blacks can be racist and can I get the same response. I get the same response. I then ask them to identify the ways in which white racism adversely impacts the lives of black people as a group in list forms. My audience tells me blacks are impacted economically through discriminatory hiring practices, having little or no access to capital. Blacks are seen as lacking business acumen. They are impacted by limited access to health care. They are impacted by overrepresentation in the criminal justice system and underrepresentation in the university system. They are impacted by redlining and other discriminatory practices, barring them from finding housing in the areas of their choice. The list goes on. I then ask them to identify how black racism adversely impacts the lives of white people as a group through their silence. There is silence because while black people may have prejudices and at times even feel hatred toward white people, perhaps even inspiring fear in many, the reality is that black people lack the power to affect the lives of white people as a group in the same way. Black people's feelings toward white people do not preclude a white person's ability to get along, receive fair treatment by the justice system, acquire education, and so on. This then is racism, the belief that people differ along biological and genetic lines, that one's own group is superior to another group. These beliefs are coupled with and compounded by the power to negatively affect the lives and limit the options of those perceived to be inferior. America's history and is inextricably bound to this racist ideology, from the codifying of slavery to the belief in manifest destiny, to the treatment of illegal immigrants and the branding of them as criminals, rapists, or potential terrorists. Many of America's actions continue to conflict with its creed that all men are created equal. America perceives itself to be the melting pot, the land of opportunity. The words engraved in bronze inside the Statue of Liberty: give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me, might lead one to believe that all have been welcomed to the shores of America as people with equal rights, privileges, and most important, prospects for success. To be sure, by and large, many immigrants have found this to be true. Western and Northern Europeans in the 19th century, Eastern and Southern Europeans early in the 20th century experienced their hardships, and within a few decades, were enjoying their version of the American dream. America has been and continues to be promoted as a nation that prides itself on equal opportunity as well as rich multiculturalism. However, history tells a divergent story where Africans are concerned. With the endorsement of slavery as a legal, acceptable, and justifiable institution, the founding fathers committed America's original sin, a sin that continues to plague America, allowing slavery to persist at America's inception, caused those who signed off on the sentiments to so eloquently, allowing slavery to persist at America's inception, caused those who signed off on the sentiments so eloquently represented in their Declaration of Independence to perjure themselves in its face and doomed the nation to a future of lies, pain, and struggle. Since that time, Black America has labored to recover from the dehumanization of bondage, the offense of peonage, the outrage of the Black codes, the affront of convict leasing, the indignities of Jim Crow, and the ravages of poverty. During the same time, white America has struggled to come to grips with its legacy of chattel slavery and other crimes it committed in the name of morality, progress, and supremacy. The behavior associated with the behavior associated with maintaining and justifying slavery, as well as the consequent assault on the generations of African Americans that followed, has resulted in injury and yet unmeasured to the American psyche. America's resistance to accepting responsibility for slavery and repairing the damage continues to prevent the nation from taking its place as the world's moral leader. So, we need to notice race as it relates to differential treatment because the relationship between blacks and whites continues to be among the most challenging issues facing the country today. Problems engendered by race are seemingly intractable. The distrust many black people have for whites is often palpable. The indifference of most whites to the black experience is contemptible. The disparities with regard to health, wealth, and education are vast and expanding. All of these things make it more difficult to live as a black person in America than as a white person. We need to notice because the overarching problem of this millennium continues to be the problem of the color line. Well over 100 years after emancipation and many decades after Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka in 1954, segregation remains the norm rather than the exception. Issues of race and diversity are so critical because they remain at the root of the most pervasive problems facing this nation. We also need to notice because so little understanding exists between black and white America, on the face of it, we are the best civil with each other. But all too often, this civility masks unresolved resentments and hatreds. African Americans are repeatedly asked to reveal proof of the realities of racism to skeptical white people. They reluctantly explain the countless incidents of discrimination and even assaults directed at them and those they love. Some cite the election of President Barack Obama as evidence that racism is ended. More often than not, the response of the questioner is denial and disbelief, while the black person, having reopened wounds, is left frustrated and re-injured. To me, noticing difference is most important because it is the first step in arresting the national hemorrhaging of African Americans. It is through such awareness that we can take the first steps towards healing the wounds passed on to the present generation through centuries of ignorance and neglect at the hands of the governing and governed alike. And this is not only between black and white America. We need to notice that the overwhelming majority of the world are people of color. If humanity is to evolve, we need to notice the differences among people, understand them, celebrate them, learn how to integrate these differences, and become a true world community. I'm trying to see if I'm going to read this next piece. Okay, I'll read this next piece and stop. The emergence of African American culture. So, two, as race plays little or no role in describing the differences between peoples, culture plays a highly significant one. During the 1980s, diversity became important in America and culture was celebrated in our schools. Most often, that meant a discussion about cuisine, holidays, and attire. Today, little has changed. When people think of celebrating diversity, most think of food and festival experiences. Occasionally, people will include language in the mix. These are indeed diverse aspects of cultures. However, they barely scratch the surface. There are many more differences and more significant ones. The most important of these are so deeply rooted in our psyches that most of us don't even know they exist, and so we rarely examine them. Dr. Edwin Nichols, in his seminal work, The Philosophical Aspects of Cultural Difference, explores some of these differences, and his framework lays the foundation for the following discussion. Imagine you have a meeting scheduled for 9 p.m. at your place of business. About 30 people are expected to show up. It might be some kind of departmental planning meeting. It might be some kind of departmental planning meeting or a monthly meeting to get everyone up to speed on new policies. Now imagine you are 20 minutes late for this meeting. When you arrive, the meeting is already in progress. What do? If you are like most Americans, you enter the room as inconspicuously as possible. Take a seat in the back and quietly get up. Hopefully no one will notice. If someone does notice you and points out your tardiness, you respectfully apologize and quietly sit down. In many parts of Africa, things are very different. Let me tell you about a meeting I attended in Lesotho. The meeting was scheduled for 8. 40 to 50 people were expected to show up. Our group got there a few minutes early and watched as everyone happily talked with each other, apparently in no particular hurry to get started. The meeting actually got started close to 9. A woman entered about 15 minutes after the meeting had gotten underway. Did she quietly take a seat in the back? No, she did not. Was she inconspicuous? No, not at all. When she arrived, the meeting came to a halt. She first offered an apology, then everyone greeted her. No apology is necessary. Welcome. It's very good to see you. Glad you could come, all expressing happiness that she had arrived. To my surprise, she then went around the room and greeted everyone individually. This went on every time a person entered the meeting, all in about a dozen times. On a few occasions, the person entering just the meeting to continue without making the rounds. To those at the meeting, it seemed as if nobody showed up late. They simply showed up at another time. The meeting ended when the work was done. This is just one example. There are literally hundreds of others. Anyone who does business overseas knows this. Every culture has a myriad of customs, mores, and tacit rules that a person must be aware of if their ventures are to have a chance of succeeding. The importance of accepting hospitality in Saudi Arabia, following greeting customs in Lesotho, and showing deference in Japan are just a few illustrations. In an even more fundamental way, these customs, mores, and rules flow from the value systems that are the bedrock of a particular culture. If we are to understand African American culture, we must understand the African value systems from which it sprang. Let's look at three philosophical concepts that help to form part of the bedrock on which African American culture is based. The preeminence of relationship, our African based conception of time, and the role traditions and intuition play in knowing the world. With that, I'm going to say peace and I'll bring it back to you guys again. Appreciate you for watching. Again, share. And today I'm giving big shout out to Jay Chambly with the food. You know what I mean? It was on time, didn't take long. It was nice, it was warm, it was scrumptious. Facts. Jay Chambly, Buffalo Eat 716 or Buffalo 716 Eat, something like that. I'll be on that joint. I rock with him. I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed. Peace. Oh, January 11th, come through. We're gonna be at the Crucial Center, 10 a.m. If you black, you tired of hearing all this gentrification and whatnot, and not seeing what's done about it, it's time to stand up, take action, and you know what I mean, make it happen. What's going on? See you then. Peace.